Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be going over Python Booleans. Now before you get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really supports me throughout my journey as I upload and create videos related to Python programming as well as math. So if you would like to support me and learn everything there is to know about Python, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, so now let's learn about Booleans in Python. So we're going to be learning about Python Booleans. Okay, so what are Python Booleans? So Python Booleans represent one of two values. They represent true or false. So represent true or false. So in programming, you often need to know if the code or the line of code is true or false. And to evaluate any of these lines of code in Python, you can use Booleans. So when you compare two values, the expression is evaluated and Python returns the Boolean answer. So for example, if I write, we'll say print, and then we'll put 9 is greater than 8. So just based off our simple mathematical knowledge, we easily know that 9 is greater than 8. So if we were to run this, it would print out true, as you can see right here. So this shows us that 9 is greater than 8 and the expression or Python interprets it as true. But let's say we were to change it to 7. We'll change right here to 7. Python knows that 7 is obviously not greater than 8. So we get the value of false right there. Similarly, if we were to set 7 is equal to 8, we would also get false here because 7 is obviously not equal to 8. Now notice here that I used double equal signs. In Python you have to use double equal signs because Python interprets just one equal sign as assigning the value to a variable. Okay, so we can also print a message based on whether the condition is true or false. So let's go ahead and create some variables here. So if I were to say A is equal to, and we'll just say any random number, we'll say 200, and B is equal to, we'll say another any random number, we'll say 45, and then let's write an if statement that checks whether B is greater than A or A is greater than B. So we can write if, and then we're going to check if B is greater than A. So we'll write B greater than A, and then we have to put colons to indent it, and then we'll put print. And then if we find that B is greater than A, we'll print B is greater than A. Now, if we were to find that A is actually greater than B, we could print else, and then we could print B is not, or print B is not greater than A. Now notice here in the else statement, I did not just put A is greater than B, because what happens if we find out that both values are equal to each other? If they're equal, A is not greater than B and B is not greater than A. So that's why in the else we should always have a margin for error, so we would say B is not greater than A. So if we were to print this or run this, we could get B is not greater than A. Because what happens here is Python will take A and B and say, okay, A, store 200 in the value A, store 45 in the value B, and then it'll move to the next line of code, which is the if statement. So it'll say if B is greater than A. So B is 45 and A is 200. So 45 is not greater than 200. So it'll skip the if block and skip the printing B is greater than A, and it'll move to the else block. And since there's print B is not greater than A in the else block, it'll print that. So if we were to change this to 200 and we were to change this to 45 and we go ahead and run this, we get B is greater than A because of how the if and else statement works. Now there is a function associated with Booleans, and that is called the bool function. So let's write that. There is a function in Python called the bool function. Okay, So what does this bool function do? So the bool function allows us to evaluate any value and either get true or false in return. So for example, if I were to do print, and then we'll go bool right here, and then we'll go please sub. So let's comment all of this stuff out above us, and then we'll just run this. So what this prints out is true. And the reason this prints out as true is because no matter what you put in a bool function, it'll print out true, except for those exceptions, and we'll get to that later in the video. So, and then we can see that this is a string, so it'll print out true. Now, if we were to do the same thing with, for example, an int, we'd say just what, 50, and we were to run this, we would get true, true for both of them. And then this also works with variables. So if we were to uncomment this out, and we were to print bool a, we would also get true down there. So now let's move on to the exceptions. So there are not many values that evaluate to true false when you are using the bool function. And it's the only exception are empty values such as empty tuples, empty lists, and the number 0. So all of these would evaluate to false. So for example, if I were to, so these write evaluate to true, eval to true. So those evaluate to true. Now let's move on to things that evaluate to false. So eval to false. Okay, so if we were to just go bool false right here. Oh, I didn't spell it right, my bad. False right there, and we print this, we get nothing. And the reason is because the value boolean, there's no print before the bool, so we always have to include the print before the bool. So if we were to, for example, if we were to put print, and remember, like I said, the only exceptions are if we were to print like empty lists, empty tuples, the number 0, and the value none, we would get false. So if I were to print none right there, we would get false. And the same thing if we were to print, for example, an empty list. Print bool, and we'll just go in an empty list right there. So we would get, let it run. We'd get 2 falses right there. Same thing if we were to print the number 0 or put the number 0 in the bool function, we'd also get 0 right here. Oh, let me just put print in front of this. Print. Okay. So these all evaluate to false. So those are the exceptions when regarding to the bool function. And there is one more value, or an object in this case, which evaluates to false. And that's if you have an object that is made from a class with len function, and that returns 0 or false. So it may sound a little confusing in words, but let me explain this out. So if we were to have a function called class, and we were to say the function name is, for example, sub, and we'll just put like that, and then we'll put colons on the outside. So that's the class name, and then we're going to put the function called len. So the function len goes like this. So when we put the function len, and we put parentheses self, which is just the default way of writing the function len, and we return, for example, 0 or false, either one works, and then we put my object equals, and we'll just say sub, which is the class. And then we were to print, we'll say my object right here. So if we were to print this, let me comment this out. What would we get here? We would get false. So the reason is because whenever we're calling the function len, and we have the parameter or the argument or the parameter self going in, and we return 0 or false depending on whichever one you pass through, it will return always false. So that's just those are the only exceptions to when the bool function will return false. Everything else, it'll return true. And then you can also create functions that return a Boolean value. For example, like I just did right here, we could create another function. So we could just create like my function def my function, and then we just put return true, and we were to print my function. We were to print this. It's loading, I think. True. Yes. So we would get the value true because obviously we were returning the value true when we execute the function. And then we can also use if statements, and we can return true and then use the if statements to print different values. So for example, we could check if my function prints true, then we could write print yes, else print no. And then Python also has many inbuilt functions that return Boolean values. For example, in instance, the function, which can be used to determine if an object is of a certain data type. So for example, let me write that. So for example, if we were to have, for example, right here, the function is called in instance. That is the function name. And what this does is it determines whether an object is a certain data type. So determines if an object is a certain data type. So for example, if we were to have x equals 100, and then we were to say print, and then in instance, we were just to say x, and then comma int, right there, for example. And then what happens when we put in instance x? What would happen here is that it would print. Let me just go ahead and print this. So what happens here is it would print true. So the reason is because the function in instance is a already function that is programmed in the Python library. So when we pass the value x through this, it'll say, okay, we'll look for the value x, which is one of the parameters that you pass through. And then the second parameter you pass through is what it'll be checking for. So for example, print in instance x comma int, it will check whether x, the value of the variable x, is an integer. So if we were to put string instead of int there, here it would print false because obviously 100 is not a string unless we put around, like quotes around it. Then here it would print true because we now just changed the value of x into a string. So I hope that makes sense to everyone, which is the basics of Boolean in Python. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next video. Check out my Python programming playlist.